Welcome to Introduction to Maya series. I am your instructor Rohan Page. In this video, we will understand the fundamentals of rigging. What will be our workflow? We will understand the different constraints available in Maya and what is the use, how we can connect them. Let's start with the session. Constraining is the helpful process, one of the vital process of rigging. With the help of constraint, we can attach, translate, rotate, and scale attributes with the transformation attributes of other object. You can create constraint between one or multiple objects. Let us start with the constraining, understanding the constraining process. The constraint option is available under rigging menu. There are different types of modules over here. So if you want to have this constraint option, you should switch to rigging module if you are using Maya 2016. But if you are working with any of earlier version of Maya, that is Maya 2015 or 2014, then you will get this constraint option under animation module. I'll switch it to rigging and we have an option of constraint. There are lots of different type of constraint listed under this window. But right now we will learn those important constraints which we will be using constantly for rigging process. Let us start with the point constraint. Point constraint connects the translation attribute of parent object with the translation of attribute of the child. You can apply this constraint between one and between two or more than two objects. The leader object is called as parent, whereas follower objects are called as child. Now let me just create two basic objects. While creating a constraint between two objects, first decide which is the parent object. Suppose this is a parent object, this is a child. While creating a constraint, you should select parent object first, hold shift and select child object. Go to constraint, point constraint option box. This is the default setting of point constraint. Without changing anything, if I'll apply, your child object will snap to the parent object. Then you will have to manually mention first the offset value, then only it will keep the distance. So rather than mentioning the value of the offset and changing the transformation, it is giving you problem and it will take time. So it is better while you applying a point constraint, turn this option on, maintain offset. So it is going to maintain the whatever the distance of the child and parent, that will be maintained, and this child object will not snap on the parent object. While transforming, it will maintain this distance, whatever the distance will be there between them. And it is going to constrain the transformation attribute of one object with other in all axes. Because I have turned this on all axis, it is going to constrain all axes. For example, I'll say add. Now you can see if you'll select child object, its translation attributes are seen in a blue color, which means those are connected with the parent object with the help of point constraint. If you'll go down in the inputs of this object, you can see under the history we have polycube to point constraint one option. Now if I select the parent object and translate it, you can see child object is following. Whereas I can simply move this child at any place and I can move it. But you can see when I'm moving it, if I'll move it anywhere and then I'm selecting the parent, it is snapping to its original position, right? It is maintaining the offset. Now other thing which I want to explain, that suppose now you don't want for few what you can say, for few time you don't want this object to follow it. If you want to turn off the working of the point constraint, then what you can do, but if you don't want to delete the constraint but want to turn off its working, what you can do, select. There you have the option called as polycube1 W0. W stands for weight. If the weight of the constraint is 1, then it is going to follow that object. If the weight is 0, then it is not going to follow it. Right. So just I'll press 1. It's going back to the original position according to the translation where I have moved it. That's why it is snapping to the position. Next is how to see, now it is following all axes. Now how to follow only one axis? Suppose you don't want to follow all the axes of parent. Then what we can do is, first of all, I want to delete this point constraint which I have applied. To delete the point constraint, you can go to outliner. Under this polycube, you can see there is a constraint and you can delete it. Now there is no constraint over here. I'll just freeze the transformations. While applying the constraint, you can turn off this all option and you can constrain to a specific axis only. For example, I'll say Y. Add. You can see the Y attribute of the child is now seen in blue color, which means it is going to follow only Y transformation of a parent object. I am moving it in X, it is not giving any kind of effect on the child. But when I am moving it in Y, it is following it. Right? So in this way, you can connect the child object with parent with the help of point constraint. It is going to affect the translation. You can connect with all axes, or else you can connect with a specific axis. I'll just delete this constraint. Now let us see next constraint, that is Orient Constrain. Orient Constrain is going to attach rotation of child object with rotation of parent object. How it works? The process is same. Select the parent object, shift select child object, go to constrain, orient, make sure to turn on this maintain offset on. Right now it is constraining in all axes. It is not going to affect translation. It is only going to follow the rotation. So if I am rotating the parent, child object is rotating. In Orient Constraint, you can see that child object is orienting around its own pivot. It is not orienting around the parent object. You can delete this constraint. If you want to constrain it to only one axis, then you can simply turn off this constraint axis. I want to constrain it into X, add, and rotate it in X axis, it is following it, while I am rotating in other axis, it is not following it. So this is about orient axis, orient constraint. It is going to connect orientation of child object with the orientation of parent. I'll just delete the constraint. Next constraint is scale constraint. As the name suggests, it is going to connect the scale attribute of child with the scale attribute of parent. Select parent, shift select child, maintain offset on. I am constraining it in all axes. So if I'll scale it in Y, it is going to scale it in X, but it is scaling to its own pivot. It is not scaling to the pivot of parent as it happens in the parenting. Right. Now to delete the constraint, you can go back to window, outliner, delete the constraint. Next constraint is parent constraint. Now parent constraint is going to connect translate and rotate attribute of a child with the translate and rotate attribute of parent. To perform this command, you should select parent object, then select child object, go to constrain, parent, make sure your maintain offset is on, add. So when I am moving the object, child is following. And when I am rotating it, child is going to rotate around the pivot of parent object as it do in parenting. But it is not going to affect scale. But you can see the main object is getting scaled while child is not scaling itself, but it is maintaining that distance between it. Just is moving because the parent object is getting scaled. But there is no effect on the child object. The scale of the child object is same. To delete the parent constraint, you can go to outliner and delete it. Next constraint is aim constraint. An aim constraint connects the translation of the parent object with the rotation of the child object. Now it is going to help you to create controllers for eyes. We will come to that when we will see the biped rigging, but aim constraining is mostly used for that purpose. Now let us see on these objects. For example, this is my parent object. I'll just move it and I'll modify this. Suppose this is a cannon, right? And this cannon should target always towards this object. Wherever I will move this target object, it should aim to that. So how to do that? First of all, freeze the transformations. This is the parent object because it is going to move and this is going to follow. So select the parent object, shift select child, go to constrain, aim constrain, make sure your maintain offset is on, add. Now you can see the child object's translation are displayed in a blue color. So just move the parent object and you can see other object, child object is always aiming towards the parent. Wherever you will move, it is going to aim it. Right. So mainly it is used to create eye controllers. So now this is all about the constraints, right? So let me just rewind it that point constraint is going to connect with the translation, orient for rotation, scale for scale attribute. Aim constraint is going to connect the translation with rotation, and the parent constraint is going to connect the translate and rotate of a child with the translate and rotate of the parent object. Right now let us see how we can use it to create controllers, to create a basic connection between controller and object. I'll just open one example of snowman, right? Suppose I want to create a controller for this head rotation, right? So if I'll rotate this curve in any of the axes, my head object should follow, right? So right now all the objects are separate. I will have to create a basic hierarchy. You can follow my lecture on normal parenting to understand the parenting process. So right now I'm selecting eyes, nose and head. Press P for parent. Now I want to create the connection between this controller and head. Right now If I want to rotate or animate head, I will have to select the object and rotate it. So rather than selecting the object directly, I want to create a controller for head. Let me just rename it as head controller. Freeze the transformations. Now I want to create a connection, like if I rotate it, the head should rotate. Only rotation, so that you can select parent, shift select head, you can go to constrain and you can create Orient Constrain. So you can see now if I am rotating it, it is following. Oops, sorry, I forgot to connect with all axes. Parent, child, constraint, make sure that it is connected with all the axes, and now rotate it. You can see I am able to rotate it. We can animate it also. You can just select the controller, you can press S to animate. I'll just change it from every frame to 24. Right, so basically you can create the connection between controller and object also, right? So suppose now I have created it for head, I want to create for eyes also. Let me just give a basic color. Okay, now I have eyes over here. I want to create a controller for eye. I'll just create one circle, go to front view, rotate, so I'll just freeze the transformation and I'm renaming it as left eye control, and I am renaming it as right eye control. You can select the parent, shift select child, make sure everything is freeze transformed before connecting it. Parent, child, aim constraint, maintain offset on, add. Press G to repeat the command. Now you can simply see that I am able to move these eyes. You can animate it also, right? If I am rotating the head, you can see it, my eyes are getting affected, right? Because these eye controllers are not following head. So you can simply select both the eye controllers and shift select head controller and parent it, press P. So whenever I am going to rotate this, eyes are going to follow it, right? Now I'll create a basic controller for spine and a basic controller for this base. Select it, modify, freeze transform. I'll rename it as spine controller and I will rename it as base controller, right? So when I'll rotate the spine, my spine should get rotated. So select it, shift select spine and apply Orient Constrain. Now if I am rotating my spine, head should follow, right? So create a basic parenting between them first. Select child, shift select parent, press P. Now select this. I have already created the Orient Constraint. When I am rotating it, you can see I am getting a problem over here. So I'll select it, shift select it, press P. You can see now I'm able to rotate it properly. See? Because as we have created hierarchy for head and body, head is a child of spine. In the same way, you will have to create the hierarchy between controllers. Head controller should be the child of base. Now I'll select the base, shift select this. I will apply parent constraint because I should be able to translate the character also. So I am connecting it with the help of parent. It is going to connect, translate and rotate. Same, create a basic parenting between the spine and base. So when I'm selecting it, if I'm rotating, the whole object should get affected. See now, right? But the thing is, there is the missing hierarchy between spine and base. So select spine, shift select base, press P. Now I can see I'm able to move the whole object. My hands are not connected yet. Create a hierarchy between them. I'll just freeze the transformations between them. Select, press P. Select, press P. It is the basic normal parenting, you can say, right? So I'm able to move my hand. I'll create another controller. I'll rotate it 90 degree. I'll just select them and I'll duplicate and place them over here. Okay, now I'll select those controllers, freeze the transformations. I'll rename it as left arm control. I'll rename it as left forearm control. Right arm control and right forearm control, right? So I have these controllers. I just want to connect with the rotation. So what I will do is select object, shift select child, apply Orient Constrain, select this, shift select this, apply the Orient Constraint. So I am able to rotate it. Okay, perform the same, but the thing is, when I'm selecting my arm, forearm is getting selected because of the child parent hierarchy. Connect the same hierarchy between hand, forearm controller, arm controller, press P. So when I'll rotate it, the whole arm will get rotated. Perform the same thing, controller, object, Orient Constrain, controller, object, Orient Constrain, and the basic parenting between hand controllers. Connect these hand controllers, select both the hand controllers and parent it with spine controller. Press P so that when I'll rotate my spine, hand will follow. Now you can see we have created a better hierarchy over here, right, with the help of constraint and normal parenting. Let me just attach those hands with spine. So when I'm selecting base, my whole object is getting selected. When I'm selecting base controller, my whole object will be transformable like this. So I can translate the object anywhere and I can animate it according to my requirement. Right. And then you can select, you can create a null group, Control G, and name it as snowman. And you can select both the hierarchies, that is the base hierarchy and controller hierarchy. Then select snowman null group, press P. So both the hierarchies are now under snowman. So snowman is the main hierarchy which has two sub hierarchies, that is base and base controller, right? So in this example we have seen how to use constraint and also we have used normal parenting, right? So let us see what we have learned. What we learned in this video. We have seen that point constraint connects the translate attribute of parent object with translate attribute of child object. Orient constraint connects the rotate attribute of parent object with rotate attribute of child object. Scale constraint is going to connect the scale attribute of parent object with the scale attribute of child object. Parent constraint, which creates the connection between the translate and rotate attribute of parent object and child object. Whereas the aim constraint, it connects the translation attribute of parent object with the rotation attribute of child object. It is mostly used for creating eye controllers. So if you have any query, you can follow me on Facebook, or else you can write me an email on rohan.pageanimator@gmail.com, or else you can join my Google Classroom. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel Rohan Page. Thank you.